You've likely had this situation. You're in a conversation with somebody, and despite the fact that you have outlined your position with great logic and clarity on a particular topic, when that conversation ends, they still continue with their original stupid beliefs. Clearly they're wrong, right? Clearly they're wrong. How come they can't see the truth about you being right? But then you look out in the world and you observe that things are getting kind of crazy out there. And they seem to only be progressing towards more craziness. And you think that if only the world saw things as you do, then, well, everything would be fine, right? But if you're like me, nobody has called you and asked you to be the monarch or benevolent dictator that's going to save us all. Now, don't get me wrong, I am still waiting for that call, but it has not happened yet. But in the meantime, there's increasing pressure to pick sides. Oh, well, who are you going to be with, this guy or this guy? Who are you voting for? And compromise is getting harder to find. Why is this? Why is it that despite our best and even well-intentioned efforts and arguments, that things don't change? Now, I was fortunate enough to kind of stumble across the answer for this when I was studying Swedenborg in theological school. I was actually doing some homework for another class, and I came across this basic idea that, quite honestly, it changed. It transformed the way I understood people. And the gist of it is this. It's really simple. The idea is that we are not changed, moved by thoughts, ideas, or teachings when they run counter to loves in our life. Now, I had been mistakenly believing that people were actually interested in knowing the truth above all else. I don't mean truth in some sort of abstract theological way, but I mean, actual practical life-changing truth. The reality of my mistaken ways were actually right in front of me had I only pondered it a little bit more. Here's my example. When we want to go buy a new car, we want to know which one is the best car, right? Well, not always, because there are people out there who are he's a Ford guy, a Ford man. And for that Ford man, it didn't matter how great the new Toyota was. He had his set of reasons as to why the Ford was the best, and as to why he was going to buy it. Now, I thought this kind of brand loyalty was just some sort of isolated automotive silliness, but the reality was it isn't. It's just a symptom of this kind of thinking that I had uncovered with Swedenborg. Basing our thoughts on the things that we love would be great, if not for the fact that we have generations of hereditary evils and inclinations that have corrupted what we desire. And not to mention things that have happened to us throughout our life that can scar us, and then they change our loves, which changes our thinking. And we have this strong tendency as a result to be consumed by selfish desires, by controlling others, materialism, and sometimes we just get consumed with wanting to be right. And this, my friends, creates a real problem for our spiritual growth. If we are unwilling to raise our thinking beyond this world and have no desire to think spiritually, our thoughts become even further limited. And this results in a diminished ability to judge whether something is good, bad, or even the ability to apply spiritual principles to our lives. It's basically like putting, blinders on ourselves to prevent us from seeing the spiritual. If you look in the scriptures, the Scribes and Pharisees are great examples of this phenomenon, because Jesus consistently pointed out how they failed to see the greater spiritual truths of the Jewish tradition. In the story where Jesus and his disciples ate from the fields on the Sabbath, the Pharisees were quick to point out how this work broke one of the commandments. On another Sabbath, Jesus healed a man whose right hand was shriveled. In both instances, the Pharisees were upset because the love they wanted to defend, the one where they had status and power, was being threatened. They didn't want to give up that status and power to Jesus, so they put these blinders on themselves and refused to think about the law from a spiritual point of view. And as a result, what do they see? The exacting letter of the law. That's all they see. Literalism, fundamentalism. Jesus did try to convince them that their ways were erroneous, of course, but that, didn't really go so well. They didn't really like that. He tried to change their ways of thinking when he asked, which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil? To save a life or to destroy it? But you'll notice that the thinking of the Pharisees does not change. The thinking doesn't change. Jesus heals the man, and they were furious about it. And they began to discuss what they could do to Jesus. Why didn't their thinking change? Why didn't the argument win the day? Well, because the underlying love didn't change. They still kept that same love for power and for status. And we are no different. Our thinking doesn't change because of a good argument presented to us. Our thinking doesn't change because we have a love that is attached to it. We've all seen this as kids, right? You've been a teenager and your parents try to drop some argument on you as to why you shouldn't do something. Well, how do those arguments go, right? Well, you don't listen to your parents, of course. You just go ahead and do what you're going to do in the first place. Why? Well, because you wanted to do what you wanted to do. You had that desire that was already in place. During the conversation, you might have been even thinking from your parents, oh, gee, that's sure, they got a point there, but then you get around your friends and that argument just gets thrown off to the side because, well, the original love comes through. Everything always falls back to our original love, and the thinking flows from that. This is the challenge of anybody trying to change the thinking of somebody else. Nobody's actually able to change the underlying love and affection of another person. These days, there's no end to the range of topics that are polarizing, and from what I observe, no end to the back and forth arguments that seem to fail to come to a peaceful resolution. How many times do you go on Facebook and somebody says, oh, yeah, you were right. Thanks for straightening me out on that. And we wonder why that doesn't happen. Well, it's because people feel like their underlying love is being attacked. That's where the real problem is. We think we can present a set of facts that are irrefutable and that everybody else will just simply follow our logic. Well, if you're watching this video, you might be familiar with Swedenborg too. And so have you ever tried to present Swedenborg's worldview to somebody else? And if you have, how's that gone? In my experience, it doesn't always go very well because people say, yeah, no thanks. I don't follow your logic. I love something else. It's the same thing with any other topic that a person has some investment in. They won't change if their current thoughts are based on a love. And once you realize that, you're confronted with the reality that changing somebody else's thinking is hard because changing a love is hard. It's really hard. You can barely change a love in your own life with the Lord's help, let alone can you change what somebody else loves. So for me and my sanity, what I remind myself is that most of the things that people argue about these days really are not matters of salvation. Whether or not somebody believes that the U.S. election was stolen or not isn't actually spiritually important. It won't affect a person's place in heaven. For example, if somebody thinks COVID is this deadly disease, or they think it's a mild case of the flu. So I'm just here to encourage you to guard your sanity and maybe debate some of these things in life a little bit less. If you do choose to engage in a debate, well, good luck to you, and just know that you're facing an impossible battle if the person you're talking to feels that you are attacking something that they love. So there you have it. I hope that helps. I hope it helps you guard your sanity. All the best to you, and God bless.